So today we're going to be sewing the zipper pouch, and this is a really fun project out of some floral fabric. And I love this project because you can choose the inside fabric and the outside fabric and kind of coordinate that, and it's just really fun. And it's a great project to give as gifts, and it's something that's really straightforward. So for me, once I start sewing one or two, then I just kept sewing them and I keep sewing them. So really a fun project and a wonderful thing to learn, and then you can just kind of keep going with it. So what we need for this bag is we need 1 fat quarter for the inside and 1 fat quarter for the outside. So just 2 fat quarters, or if you're going to be using like yardage, you could use 1/3 of a yard for each of those. Or if you're going to use your like stash or scraps or whatever, I've pulled a letter size piece of paper here, and that is what our biggest pieces are going to be out of. So inside fabric and outside fabric, you just want to take a letter size piece of paper or an A4 and just cut around it, like leave extra about 1/2 inch or 1 inch for those 2 fabrics. And then also we're going to do one of those out of quilt batting. And then we just have a few additional pieces to cut out of the outside fabric. So all of that you can get out of the outside fat quarter, just like 1 fat quarter. So that works out really well. You just want to take a look at it before you cut it. Make sure you're spacing them out correctly. So here we have the pouch, the larger rectangle, and then we have our little pieces here. So as far as the pieces go that come from the outside fabric, you need 2 5-inch squares, 2 strips that are 1 3/4 by 12.5, and 1 strip that is 2 by 8.5, and then 1 9-inch or 23 centimeter closed zipper. And this is the bag that we can make from that. So this is a fun project, and if you've never used quilt batting before, I would really encourage you to try this, because you can buy like a little craft size package, but quilt batting is so much nicer to use than like a stiff interfacing, and your finished project is nice and soft and it's washable. So it's really a nice way to do this. And like I said, if you've never used quilt batting, you're really gonna love it, I think, to be able to sew through it. And you don't have to do anything special in order to sew through this piece. So it is really something nice to try, something new. So here I have trimmed around these 3 pieces, the inside, the outside, and the quilt batting, and I've left one side pretty straight and square so that I can take my ruler here, and about through the middle I'm going to put a piece of washi tape through this. And that way I'm going to get my first sewing line, and then we are going to take this to the sewing machine and start. So I am placing this on the long side of our rectangle. So since I'm using letter size paper, this is the side that's a little bit bigger than 11 inches long, and then we're going to be sewing horizontal lines through here. So you could also use masking tape here, and it can be wider, and then your quilting lines would just be wider, and that would work out really well. I've done bags with small lines like this and wider lines as well. So now we're going to take it to the sewing machine. I don't have anything special going on here. I'm just going to take that whole piece, which is our pouch, like the body of the pouch, and we're just going to go ahead and sew this, and I'll sew a couple lines, and then we'll go ahead and speed that up to make this quicker, but that way you can see. And like I said, I just have my regular foot, and it's just lined up against the washi tape, and I just need that washi tape to hold long enough to kind of sew this one line, so I'm not too worried about that. But I'm just lining the edge of my foot up, and I've kind of noticed where my needle is, because on my machine I can move my needle. And I'm using thread that matches in color, so it kind of disappears. So we'll see the texture of it, but we won't really see the thread of it. And I'm using the same color in the bobbin, but it also works with my inside fabric. So you might want to think about that. Maybe use an all over print, something that is more forgiving, and then maybe matching your thread so that it kind of disappears. So that's kind of nice, especially the first time you sew this. And then everything just looks really professional. And on my machine, I typically have a quilting needle in. It doesn't matter unless you're having difficulty, like if your needle's kind of punching through, you might want to change to like a denim needle, or like I said, I pretty much always have a quilting needle in my machine, but typically you can just go ahead and sew right through this, and it's such a nice feeling to be sewing through this batting. It's just like such a nice blanket kind of a feel. So better for me than like interfacing, which to me is pretty stiff, and the final product of this just turns out really nice and soft, and it's washable, and so I just feel like it's a nice thing to try. If you haven't done that before, I really do think you're going to love that. So now I'm just going through and I'm just repositioning that tape where the previous line is, and then I'm just going to line up my foot again, and that way my lines are pretty even. It's not really necessary to have them even, but it is kind of a nice look when everything looks nice and uniform. And I'm going to sew up to the end, but I don't need to sew like right up to the end, but I am kind of going to quilt almost to the end here. And then I'm just going to turn it around and we'll do the other half of this piece. So in real time, this might take 5 or 10 minutes, just kind of depends on how wide your lines are here. So not very long. This doesn't take very long at all. And it really gives you like a very good looking finished product. So it is a really nice thing to do. And if you have never done this before, I would really encourage you to just kind of jump in and do it. It's really a lot of fun. I think that's why a lot of people love to do quilting projects, because they are really a lot of fun, and then your final product is usually so nice. So I would encourage you to give it a try. And you notice here we are sewing the long side of our fabric, so we're basically sewing horizontal lines on the long side. So, you know, this is, for me, letter size, so that would be like 8.5 by 11, so I'm sewing the longer 11-inch side with these horizontal lines. And then now I'm going to take this piece and I'm going to trim it down to the exact like 8.5 by 11. I am going to be careful about like where these quilting lines are, and just make sure that things are a little bit centered and it looks okay. It should turn out okay no matter where you trim it. I'm just going to be careful to trim it so that my quilting lines here are parallel to where I trim it, so that everything looks nice and square, if that makes sense. And if you have an A4 size, you do want to trim it to 22 centimeters by 28 centimeters. And again, that I'm using a 9-inch closed bottom zipper, but you would need to use a 23 centimeter zipper, which I think is the same zipper, but just so you know that if you're not in the US. And I will put those dimensions in the description too. So you're going to take the 1 3/4 inch by 12.5 inch strip. We actually have 2 of them, but we're going to take 1 of them here. And I'm just going to kind of center. It doesn't really matter. I just like to have a little bit hanging over each side. And we're going to do like right sides together on the back, or on the inside of our piece here. So whatever fabric you chose for the inside, we're going to face that strip onto it, and we're going to put the strip face down, so the nice side is not showing. You're kind of seeing the yucky side. And we're going to do a binding strip here. So I'm moving my needle a little bit, and I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch seam here, and I would call that a scant 1/4 inch. So I don't want to make it any larger than a 1/4 inch at all. I kind of want to stay on the skinny side of a 1/4 inch. And that's because we're going to wrap this around, and then we're going to cover this seam up. So if you've never done a binding strip before, this is how we like finish a quilt edge. And if you've gotten to this point and you kind of understand what I did with this piece and then now this binding strip, I think you can call yourself a quilter, because this is basically what you do to make a quilt. So you know, put your sandwiched together, you quilt it, then you bind it. So this is basically the whole thing. So if you can do this, you can make a quilt. So now I'm just bringing that strip around to the front, and I'm folding in about 1/4 of an inch, and then I'm going to fold it over, and then we're going to sew that down. So what I'm trying to do here is to cover up the stitching line that we just made. And these binding strips just make a really nice finished edge. And you'll see these a lot in bags, clothing. But this is how you make a binding strip if you've never done this before. And in this case, it's 1 3/4. Sometimes they can be different sizes, and so I'm folding this over, but I'm being very gentle about it. I'm not pulling on it at all. So the more kind of easy I am with this, the more that this will just lay very flat. If I start pulling it tightly, you're going to get like some warping and maybe some cupping on this piece. So just like I usually try to be like really, give it a little bit of slack and not pull it tight at all. So now I'm going to sew the inside of this folded area, and I'm going to do about 1/16 of an inch. I don't really worry about too much about the size of it. I just worry about like if it's straight. So I just try to keep it nice and straight. So you can see I just sew a little ways, and then I kind of reposition the fabric, and by the time we get to the end, I think we'll have a nice straight, professional looking piece. So this is the area that we're going to add to the zipper. So it actually gives it a really nice finished look. So once I am finished with this, then I go ahead and trim the edges off so that they match up with this piece. And we're just doing this to both of the long edges, and then the other ones we just leave it raw. And you can see how nice that looks on the back side as well, or it'll be the inside of the bag. So it looks really finished on the inside of it as well. And so again, we flip it over to the inside fabric, and then we're going to put our 1 3/4 by 12.5 inch strip, kind of, I would say, upside down. So you want the nice side facing down. And then we're going to do the exact same thing. So I do let a little bit hang over, top and bottom. You could do the exact same size strip. That's totally fine. I just like to do a little bit longer, and then I can trim it super straight. So that's just like a personal preference. So again, I'm sewing like a scant 1/4 inch here. And then once we finish this, I will be folding it around to the front, and then we'll do that additional seam. But when we do our second seam, basically we're trying to cover up the first seam that we've just sewed here, or get it in exactly the same spot. So, but any way that you do it, it will turn out looking really nice. And again, I'm going to sew on the inside of this, and I'm doing it about 1/16 of an inch in from the edge. And that is just eyeballing it. And I think it's worth it to sew a little bit and just kind of reconfigure it and sew a little bit more. So it's not a very long piece. Obviously it's only 11 inches long, so it doesn't take very long to do, but it's kind of nice just to get it as straight as you can. And then once we're done sewing this, we're going to again just trim those edges off so everything looks nice and square. And this is the body of the pouch. So But I do like designing patterns with just like printer paper or letter size paper, A4 paper, because everyone has that, so they don't have to like get an extra pattern or print an extra pattern. They already have that. You don't have to measure it out. So I do kind of like using that. I hope that that is helpful. Okay, so this is the inside of the bag, how those strips look, and the outside of the bag. So it looks nice from both sides. That's one reason why you'll see binding strips used on so many different things, because they look good on both sides. And then the other shorter sides, we just leave it completely unsewed, so totally raw. So our next step here is we're going to prepare things for the zipper. And then we're going to be adding this piece to our zipper, but we want to add a few pieces to the zipper first. So first we're going to be taking those two 5-inch squares, and we'll be sewing kind of a little bit similar to what we just did. But all of these again are from the outside fabric of the bag, and you can fit all of these out of a fat quarter. You just want to make sure you take a look at it before you start cutting, that you're going to get all the pieces out of it that you need. So I'm just rolling 1/4 inch over, then another 1/4 inch over, and then we're going to take that same type of seam. So it's just sewing like 1/16 of an inch in. And I'm just trying to get it straight. I'm not, worrying too much about my measurements or anything like that. And then once I sew this, I'm just going to cut the threads and then just quickly press it. And I like to kind of have a nice hot iron, so it gives me really flat seams. So these are our two 5-inch squares. You just pick two of the sides and do that finish on two sides, like two opposite sides, and then the other sides just stay raw. We don't do anything to those. Okay, so now we're going to take the other piece, which is 2 inches by 8.5 inches, again from the outside fabric. And I'm just folding it on one side about 1/4 of an inch, and on the other side I'm folding it about 1/2 an inch. And then I'm going to fold these two together. And that is going to give me a piece that's about 5/8 inches wide. And that measurement is not too important, but something around that will be good. So, and I have tried to iron this, and it's just so awkward, it doesn't really work. So you can kind of finger press it, and you can get it good enough to just start it with your sewing machine. So what I'm going to do is start it, and in this case I'm going to put it in, and I'm just going to make sure that I hold my threads. Like I'll get my top thread and just hold it, because otherwise something small like this, your sewing machine might want to eat it. So if you hold that thread and pull it while it goes through, it won't give you any kind of like a thread nest on one side, and your sewing machine won't eat it, because you're just giving it like a pull through. So, and then I'm just sewing a little bit, I'm stopping, I'm kind of repositioning it so that it stays the same size all the way down. So I'm sewing on one side here, probably again doing like a 1/16 inch seam, and then I'll just kind of turn it around and do the other side the same. And then I'm going to take a line down the middle. And that way the whole thing stays nice and flat and nothing is popping out. So this is for tab pulls. It's kind of like those things that look like ears on this bag. And I do really like these. That's why I'm including this. I have bags without it, and you can leave this off if you want to, or you could use ribbon for this instead or something else. But I do personally kind of like being able to kind of grab it while I'm like doing the zipper. So I do like leaving it in. And again, I'm going to hold these, make sure I'm holding these thread tails just to kind of make sure that it starts well. And I'm just going to take this line down the middle. So it's like 3 lines of sewing. Okay, so now I'm just trimming these ends, which is also trimming off those threads. And then we're going to fold this in half, and then we're just going to cut it in half because we're going to turn this one piece into 2 tabs. And then there's a good side and a not so good side. So the not so good side we put on the inside, obviously. And then these 2 are what we're gonna be adding these to the zipper soon. But now we know they're the exact same size. Okay, so now we're going to work on our zipper a little bit, and I do use a closed bottom zipper. So what I'm doing here is just sewing the end of it together. So I'm probably sewing even less than 1/4 inch, but I'm sewing towards the end of the zipper, and this just keeps it more in place while we're adding these other elements to it. Otherwise, I do find zippers are a little slippery and they kind of want to flop around a little bit, so this just keeps it a little more stable. And in this case, I'm just going to open the zipper, but I'm kind of taking an eyeball of where the ends are going to be, and then I'll sew it just to make sure I don't distort it, because we want to make sure that zipper is nice and smooth. So I do kind of eyeball where, because on this side of it, they're a little bit offset, so you just want to keep an eye on the way the zipper is when it's shut, and then you can make sure it's like that, even though this is open. And then, so I sewed this little bit on here, and then I'm just going to keep checking the zipper to make sure that it opens and closes well. Because once we sew other things onto it, it's going to be a lot harder to fix that. So I might as well figure it out now. So now I'm taking a zipper pull and just want to make sure I have the better side out. And now I'm going to sew that little edge together, because sometimes these like to, it's hard to line them up almost when you're doing multiple things. So I go ahead and sew it now so that it's very well on top of each other and they're not sliding around, because that can easily happen. So, and I'm just going to do that for both of these tab pulls, and then we're going to add that onto the zipper as well. So now I'm going to add this on, and I'm kind of choosing a side. And for my zipper, they're even on both sides, but you might want to make sure before you sew this on that this tab pulls where you want it, and that enough is showing. I should say that the same amount is showing on both sides. So you just want to kind of measure that out, or do it by eyeball, which is what I'm doing. And then I'm sewing right at the end of this zipper again. So more towards the end of it, not towards the actual zipper. So see, we have like a big gap there, but that's the way we want it for the moment. So I'm just making sure that this is the way that it is going to finish is the way that I want it to be. So you can kind of place these tabs wherever you want them. But at this point where we're sewing this, you do want to make sure this is centered on the actual zipper. And so you can see I'm kind of figuring it all out, and then I'm going to take it and sew it upside down just so I can see where that metal part is and avoid that. And again, I am sewing at the end of this for this tab. The next step will be going right up to the zipper, but on this one I'm just sewing more towards the end of it. So our next step, we're going to be adding those 5-inch squares. So now we take these, and we want to put the 5-inch square, we want to make sure that it's centered, and we want to make sure that the right side is facing the right side of the zipper and that the tab is in the middle. So if you're not sure about that, just pinch it with your fingers and then open it up and make sure that it's going to look the way you want it to look when it's done. So I have switched to my zipper foot here, and then I did adjust where my needle is going to be so I can kind of snug it right up to that zipper. So see, now when I open it, it's like I know it's the way it's supposed to be. So if you want to test that out, just like pin it or pinch it with your finger and then open it up. Just make sure it looks the way that you're going to want it to look at the end. And in this case, since I know that it looks the way I want it to, I'm just going to sew it again just for some extra strength. And now we just do this to both sides of this zipper so that both sides look the same. And then I want to make sure that, again, that zipper opens and shuts. I do that a lot during this whole process just to make sure I didn't accidentally stitch something and it's not working or it's out of alignment or something. So I'm checking that zipper pretty frequently. So now we're going to add this first side of the pouch to our zipper unit here, and you just want to make sure that it's centered side to side. So in this case I have about 1 inch hanging over on both sides, but you just want to make sure that you center that. And you can see I'm putting out where to sew here, and that's where we're going to start stitching. But in order to line it up correctly, you can put that, remember that binding strip that we put on, you can lay that on top of the tab. That's actually better because then it lines up right where you want it. But we won't sew it onto the tab. We're going to sew like a stitch in front of that tab. But that way it lines up really nicely. So I'm going to use the hand crank on my sewing machine to kind of start this first stitch. That way I know that it's going in exactly the right spot. Okay, so I put the stitch down and then I'm going to go 2 or 3 stitches and then back tack it, because this is a place where it does need to be pretty strong. And I'm sewing probably again about 1/16 of an inch from the edge of this strip, and between this strip and the zipper teeth is about 1/8 of an inch. So you could do more than that if you want, but I leave about 1/8 of an inch. I know it looks smaller on camera here, but it's actually about 1/8 of an inch. And so again, I'm using about 1/16 of an inch seam from where our binding strip is, and I'm just top stitching this onto our zipper. So this particular zipper is pretty slippery, so I'm just going a few stitches and then kind of repositioning things and doing that, you know, every few stitches. I love this zipper. It's called a fashion zipper, and I really do love it, but it definitely is slipperier than my other zipper. So I'm just kind of slowly sewing that down, and what we're going to do is when we get to the end here, well, I might have to pull that zipper out of the way, and then I'm going to again reposition the body of that bag, the binding strip that we put on. I'm going to lay it right on top of that tab, but I'm not going to sew all the way to the tab. I'm going to actually sew like the stitch before we get to the tab, and I'm going to back tack there too. And that just gets this whole bag like in the right position, and it looks really professional when you finish it. So we're going right up to the edge there, and then we're going to back tack. So this is the procedure for the first side of the bag, and then the second side is going to be a little bit different. So at this point we have our tabs in place, and we kind of have these 5-inch squares just like hanging out, and they are supposed to do that for the time being, so kind of like hanging out the sides. And then I'm just checking that zipper again to make sure nothing went wonky here. And I gotta cut my threads. I'm always cutting threads. Okay, so now I'm gonna take this out of the machine and I'm just gonna pull the other side of that bag around, and we're gonna add the second side on. So the second side, we are also going to just top stitch it, but we do need to open up the zipper. And I just want to show you exactly how to do this. That's why I'm doing such a close-up shot, so you can see exactly what I'm doing here. So once I pull this bag around, I'm just going to throw some pins in, and I am lining this side up just to make sure these two sides are equal. And I'm going to throw several pins in here just to keep it in place. So they might not even be in the right direction or whatever. It doesn't matter. I'm just trying to make sure that I keep that bag centered on this side as well. So I'm just being careful to do like 1/8 of an inch away from the zipper here, like I did on the other side. And as I'm sewing, I'll just keep looking at this and making sure it's where I know that I did on the other side, so things look pretty even. But again, we're just top stitching this onto the zipper. And we're going to start, it's almost like wherever you can. We're going to start it as up as far as you can, because you really need to be as far up as you can, and the rest of the bag needs to be out to the side of this. So in other words, we're not sewing this whole bag together, otherwise we'd be sewing it shut, so we don't want to do that. But we're basically making sure that we're just sewing our one side here onto the zipper, and there's nothing else underneath it. So I want to go as far to the one side as I can, but it's you can't get it all the way back to the tab. We're gonna have to do that on the second step here. So now we just start and I back tacked, and then I'm gonna go down to the other side of the bag. So I would say on this one side we can't really reach. It's about a couple inches. That's about as much as we're gonna have to go back and do. And on this side I'm just going slowly. I'm kind of repositioning things, making sure that everything's the way it should be. And then I'm going to sew, obviously take our pins out, don't want to sew over those. And then on this side, I'm going to just finagle the zipper so that I can sew right up to that tab again. So you can see I would say it's a little more wonky than the first side. The first side is really easy to do, which is nice. And then the second side, we're basically just trying to match it to the first side. So I'm just going right up to that tab again. And I do have to kind of pull my zipper around because it's a little bit of a tight spot. But this is the best way to do this. And honestly, I feel like top stitching this onto the zipper is just so easy. It's like so much easier than other ways that you can do these kind of bags, I think. So now I'm right up to that one tab, which is nice. And then now we just need to go back and we need to get the other side up to that tab. So I'm rolling back the back of the bag, and it's probably better, I'm just pinning it, but it's probably better to put in a safety pin. And then you can see I've got that nice piece of bulk there, so I know exactly where not to sew, because I'm not going to sew through both sides of this bag here. And then I hand crank the needle in right where I left off. And then I'm going to just start from here, and I'm going to go and back tack a little bit. And what I'm doing is I'm going towards the other end. I'm going towards that other tab, and I'm going to sew right up to that tab. And then I'm going to back tack too. So it's a thing where you sew several stitches and you just kind of reposition it, so several more stitches till you're right up to that tab. Okay, so we sew right up into that corner, and then of course we're going to back tack to give it some extra strength, and we're done with this side of the zipper. Now on the other side, if for some reason you couldn't get all the way back to that tab, you can do the same process on the other side. You just roll the back of the bag back and safety pin it, and then you can just sew into that corner. So I found it easier to sew from the inside out rather than trying to start at the outside and going back inward, but you can definitely do that. I've done that a few times as well. So now I'm just going to double check that zipper again, and I'm also I'm just going to unpin this back here, and then I'm going to center the zipper on the bag and then go ahead and pin it. So I just want to make sure that the bag isn't kind of leaning to one side, and just I do that by measuring, and for me I had about 2 inches on both sides, and then I could just pin it, and then now I can do this process where I've turned the bag inside out. So you want to do that before you before you center the zipper and pin it, because otherwise then you won't be able to do that. So we're going to sew just the ends of the bag shut, and you can see we have those 5-inch squares just kind of hanging out to the side here, and I'm catching the top seam in this seam if it works out, and this is like a generous 1/4 inch seam I'm doing here, and it just depends on the makeup of your zipper. Sometimes that will work out and sometimes it won't. But we do want to make sure before we get to this center point that that tab, your zipper tab that we sewed on, is pointing towards the middle, because if it's pointing anywhere near where we are sewing here, then we're going to accidentally sew it in and catch it when we don't want to be. We want to have that tab pointing inward. So I'm just going a few stitches and then kind of repositioning and going a few more stitches just to make sure that this is sewn really well, and then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. So sometimes if I thought it worked out well, then I just stitched again to just add strength to it, but that's optional. So I'm just making sure that everything's laying straight here, and I'm going to take another like generous 1/4 inch seam, and since I can, I'm going to catch that seam from the 5-inch square. I'm just going to catch it in there, and then I'm just going a few stitches and making sure that everything is where it should be, and then I do a few more stitches, and again making sure that that tab or zipper pull tab is facing inward. We don't want to catch that in this seam at all. So we still have these 5-inch squares kind of hanging out to one side, and at this point we are going to turn this bag inside out again, so it's right sides out, and then we're just going to make sure our zipper is working. Again, do that a lot in this. When sewing this bag, I just want to make sure that nothing I'm doing is kind of interfering with that zipper. So now we have a nice flat bag, and I did one time make one of these and I just kept it flat because I really liked it. In this case we have these 5-inch squares hanging out, so if you did that you might have to do something with these. But now we're going to box these corners, so you just want to make sure that those 5-inch squares are not ending up in this box corner seam. So I'm just kind of making sure that they're not in the corner, because we're going to need those, the remainder of these 5-inch squares. We're going to need that in a minute here. So what I'm doing is I'm just taking, like at this point it's a real flat pouch, and then I'm just going to pop it up, and this is the seam that we just sewed. So you do want to make sure these points are out as much as you can get them out here, but we're going to measure along this seam that we just sewed, and we're going to go 3/4 of an inch in from where the point should be. If you can't get the point out all the way, I've had that happen a little bit, and then we want to go 3/4 of an inch up from the seam and 3/4 of an inch down from the seam. And if that's not really working as far as like what's like in your line of sight, then you need to just kind of reposition that. So if we do that, we go 3/4 of an inch over, 3/4 of an inch up, and 3/4 of an inch down, and we do that on all 4 corners, then they're all going to match. So that's what we want to do, is make sure that we're doing it that way. And this seam that we're doing is parallel to our binding strip that we added onto the zipper. And if those are exactly straight, then your box corner is going to be straight. And for me, it's about a 1/2 inch between the seam and that binding strip. So that might vary a little bit, and then now I just trim that down to 1/8 of an inch. When you do all 4 corners, then we can turn this bag inside out, and then we're going to sew our last few seams here. So you want to be aware of where you just sewed that box corner, and we're going to re-sew on that exact same seam. So you do want to push it out, but you do want to be gentle. You don't want to push it too hard, otherwise you might push right through the seam that you just sewed. So now I'm going to fold up that 5-inch square so that it's covering this kind of boxy end of our bag here. And I'm just going to pin this. We're not going to sew across the top. We're just going to sew across the sides, but I'm going to pin this into position. And now we're just going to re-sew that box seam that we did on the outside. We're going to re-sew this on the inside, and we're going to sew it at 1/4 inch. And you do, again, want to make sure that's pushed out. Mine wants to keep kind of collapsing back in. But the reason we want that pushed out is because when we sew this and we turn it inside out, you don't want to see that first seam. We want to make sure that it gets encapsulated in this French seam. So again, I'm just checking where that box seam is. And you could sew it from the other side if you wanted to do it more exactly. I'm just kind of making the choice to do it from this side just to make it look nice. But you can absolutely do it from the other side as well. And if for some reason you do turn this inside out and you do have kind of those other seams sticking out, you just want to re-sew your seam here a little bit bigger. So now we're just going to do this to this side, and then we'll repeat the process on the other side of the bag. So you can see I'm really pushing that seam out, and I'm trying to close up on this so you can really see what it looks like. But I'm going to be very careful on each of these to just sew exactly where I sewed the first time. And that way, again, our measurements are the same, and then our box corners will be the same. And it just gives you a nice, nice professional look. And this, we turn this 5-inch square. Now it's more like a rectangle since we've folded it all up. If you do at some point want to take stitches along the top or the bottom, you can do that by hand, or else you can do it from the outside of the bag when it's turned right sides out. You still have the ability to take a couple stitches if you want to tack that down. I just leave it the way it is because it kind of sits nicely. So I forgot to back tack, so I'm going to just take another pass at this here. So once you've done this process to both sides, then we turn the bag right side out again, and we are finished. So I'm going to just show you these boxy seams from the end. And for me, it really did help to kind of look where I was drawing that first box seam and just make sure that it's parallel to the binding strips that we added. And as long as that is parallel, you get some nice straight box corners. It looks really good. So now I've added just a key ring and some dangles here. But our bag is done. I'm just putting some pins in here, just double checking everything. And I love this flower dangle that I have, and my VW bug. I love that too. So I did count in one of my bags. I put as many pens as I could fit, and I could fit like 30 pens in this zipper pouch, which I think is pretty nice. That it holds a lot. You can put scissors in here, you can put glue sticks, and washi tape. It will actually hold larger items, so it's a really nice thing to sew, really nice thing for gifts. So I hope you'd enjoy this, and I hope that you try this yourself. So thank you so much for watching. Bye.